Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. Many of us are familiar with the names of the talented, artistic, adventurous, and fun-loving American expatriates who grace the salons and watering holes of Paris and the beaches and mansions of the south of France in that glittering period between the two world wars. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Sarah and Gerald Murphy are some of the names that come to mind. But you may not have heard of Florence Gould, an American status seeker who used her beauty, sexual wiles, and her marriage to American multi-millionaire Frank Jay Gould to enter le Tout Paris, the French elite. With numerous residences, her own salons that catered to everyone from Picasso to the Prince of Wales, a hotel and casino empire that catered to the wealthiest Europeans, Florence Gould also took scores of lovers, collaborated shamelessly with the Nazi occupiers, barely escaping charges of treason after the war. A Dangerous Woman, American Beauty, noted philanthropist, Nazi collaborator by Susan Ronald has just been published by St. Martin's Press. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Florence Gould was, to me, not a particularly likable woman. She was a gold digger, a ruthless social climber, lacking in morals, dishonest, sexually promiscuous, a Nazi collaborator, a money launderer. Her sole mission in life, as you write, was to acquire as much money as she could and to advance her social status. Why write a book about her?
That's interesting, and it's a very interesting question. I felt it was a story that had to be told. I think there are very few Americans who know who she was and what she did. The fact that my previous book had been about looted art, and I came across her at first from the looted art that she bought, I thought, well, this is a nice follow-on to the original story. The fact that she has a foundation, or she established a foundation in her name at her death, and that foundation promotes Franco-American amity, and it does a wonderful job. Don't get me wrong, I think they do a great job. But her name is now present everywhere in America. Nobody knew who she was. I think it's important they know.
So her family background, her parents were French who moved to San Francisco, I guess, to see what fortune could be made there. Her father they were basically middle class. Her father ran a little French language newspaper in San Francisco. And she and her parents moved to Paris after the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. Her father came back to San Francisco, but Florence and her mother and sister stayed in Paris. She contemplated a career as an opera singer. Did she have any talent?
Yes, she did. She did. She just didn't have an operatic voice. And not to correct you, but the father stayed in San Francisco immediately after the earthquake.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and he stayed there for a good year and a half, rebuilding the family fortune, and went to Paris to try and bring his family back. But
they didn't want to come back.
The mother didn't want to come back, and Florence had been told she's going to be this fantastic opera singer, and she's going to have Paris at her feet. And of course, Paris was and still is, in many ways, the height of fashion. So Florence wanted to stay there.
Okay. Now, Florence was beautiful, and both she and her mother hoped that her beauty would attract a wealthy husband, which would allow her to have a comfortable life and take care of the mother and the sister. So she went at first after Henry, is it Heinemann? Is that
Heinemann, yes.
An American whose father was reputedly very wealthy. He fell in love with her, married her, but he turned out to have any money.
Well, he did. He just wasn't fabulously wealthy.
Okay.
The secret to the Heinemann marriage is the fact that Florence's grandmother died, her father died, and they discovered to their horror that the United States government had changed the laws. And because they'd been away from America for so long, they couldn't inherit the money. So Florence had to marry an American, preferably from San Francisco, the place she knew growing up, where she could reclaim her grandmother's fortune for the family, as well as anything that her father had left.
And was she able to get that money eventually?
Yes, some of it. It was a very long, drawn-out process.
Right.
But by marrying and going back to San Francisco, she was able to get her hands on the loot.
Okay. So then she dumped Heinemann
Yep.
moved back to Paris. Now, she tried to gain entree into the elite group in Paris, but she wasn't having much luck. I was kind of surprised because, I mean, with the kind of beauty that she had, you would have thought that that wouldn't have been so hard. But
Well, we're talking here in 1916, so that's before America entered the First World War. She comes back to Paris that's empty of all of the salonières and discovers that everybody's gone off to become a nurse. So she's going to go off and become a nurse. The only problem is once you're trained and you enter the nursing corps, you're sent wherever they want to send you. So rather than being in the outskirts of Paris, as she had hoped, she was sent to Limoges, about 500 miles away. She did a good job there, but when she came back to Paris, everybody was doing their own thing. She couldn't get any entrees anywhere. She wasn't connected, and that was the main problem. So she ended up getting a job as a chorus girl at the Folies Bergère. And she was very beautiful, but she had magnificent legs. And Frank hung out at the Folies Bergère, her future husband, and apparently the first time he saw her, he demanded to see her backstage, asked her to marry him. The only problem is he was still
married.
He was still married to wife number 2. So therein hangs a rather long tail. But it was Frank who had all the connections.
Okay. So he's almost 20 years older than she is.
Yeah.
He was married, an alcoholic, frequented brothels, cared primarily about his racehorses and his dogs. Mm-hmm. What was her attraction to him? The money?
I think there was, first of all, a spark. Frank was a phenomenal ballroom dancer. And by being a phenomenal ballroom dancer, and she's a chorus girl, you can imagine that they set alight every single stage at every single place that was the in place to be. He was very funny, and she knew that he could take care of her, and he could introduce her into the society that she had longed to be part of her entire life. So even if she didn't love him, she was in love with what he could give her.
Okay. And he was of course the son of Jay Gould, the robber baron, that we read about. So, who left a lot of money. To his 6 children.
In today's terms, that money comes up to about $4 billion. Okay.
Now, Frank went through a long and very messy divorce from his second wife, and meanwhile his brother, who was the executor of their father's estate, didn't want him to marry Florence. Mm-hmm. So it was messy, and it took years before Frank was free to marry Florence. Fortunately, she was very young, so she was like 27 when they got married.
Exactly.
Even waiting out all of this. What was his attraction to her? Was it just the legs?
It was most likely sex. It was the fact that they thought alike on a lot of different levels. She was not demanding that he be monogamous. On the contrary, nor was he demanding that she be monogamous. Essentially, what happened was whenever they had an affair, either one of them or were out with their lovers the night before, the next morning they would convene over breakfast in bed and talk about their escapades. So they were very like-minded people sexually. Mm-hmm. Frank had an enormous amount of time for her intellect. And I think he was the first man who realized how very bright she was. And that was, of course, fantastic for her.
Yeah. So once married to Frank, he began, as you said, to introduce her to the moneyed set. And meanwhile, she helped him stop drinking and supported him. He had a lot of health issues.
Yes.
They decided to move out of Paris to the French Riviera. Was this, as you suggested, because they decided that outside of Paris, they could be big fish in a smaller pond?
There was an element of that from Florence's point of view. From Frank's point of view, he needed to be in a better climate. Because Parisian winters are very cold and very damp. And within 18 months of their being married, he had to have a partial gastrectomy. So he was not a well man, and all stems back most likely to his drinking.
Right. At the time, so they discover a village called Ouin-les-Pins
Yes?
on the Riviera, and they moved there. At the time, Monte Carlo was the big luxury destination resort. And was that what inspired Florence, and she was the moving factor in this, to say we should get into the hotel and casino business?
I think it was more what was happening in Antibes to begin with.
Okay.
Because they came shortly after Gerald and Sarah Murphy came for the first time. And so she was able to see what the owner of Hotel du Cap had done at Antibes, which was only about 3/4 of a mile away from Ouin-les-Pins. Mm-hmm. Frank was absolutely enamored with what had happened in Monte Carlo, because it was really nothing more than a rock, 75 years before then. And his idea was, if we could do at Ouin-les-Pins what they did in Monte Carlo with the sandy beach, we'll really be in the money. So they were learning as they went.
Mm-hmm. They invested in the Casino de Ouin-les-Pins.
Yes.
They greased the palm of the mayor and planned the construction of the Hotel Provençal. Eventually, they came to own, 3 hotels in Ouin-les-Pins and its casino, and then they expanded there. Do you have how many properties they eventually owned?
Overall, at the beginning of the Second World War, there were 50 hotel properties, including several towns that they had bought, lock, stock, and barrel, and converted into tourism destinations.
Was that the biggest resort casino chain
Yes.
at the time?
It was the very first French luxury hotel chain that actually was surviving. There had been others that were smaller, but 50 hotels is quite a big
That's a
hotel
lot.
chain. Yeah.
We're going to take a short break, then we'll be back with author Susan Ronald after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Cheryl McCarthy, and I'm talking with Susan Ronald, author of A Dangerous Woman, American Beauty, noted philanthropist, Nazi collaborator, The Life of Florence Gould. What was the most lavish of the hotels?
The most lavish of the hotels was certainly, I think, Palais de la Méditerranée. You will have probably seen it on the news in the not too distant past, having been refurbished by Hyatt, because that's where the truck that created the terrorist attack in Nice ended up being stopped, right in front of the hotel. It was a hotel that Frank said Caesar wouldn't have built. It was absolutely phenomenal.
And it was where? Where was it?
It's on the Promenade des Anglais. Its address is number 1 Promenade des Anglais in Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. They had already bought another hotel in Nice prior to that, and then they tried to launch a bid to buy the Monte Carlo Casino and Hotel, which didn't work, but it created a lifelong enemy from Frank's point of view. They ended up trying to acquire the hotel chain in Monaco for his entire life, and they failed, but they kept trying.
So she basically becomes a Riviera queen.
Yes.
Right? They had other people, they hired people to run the hotels. What was Florence's role? Was it primarily in drawing the kinds of wealthy and famous people who would come to the hotels? Was that her?
Yeah, Florence had several different roles. She had an instinctive eye for design, instinctive eye for color. So when it came to decorating the hotels, she was very much involved in that. Her job was to invite what I would call cafe society, as opposed to aristocratic society, into the hotels, because Frank was already friendly with the aristocrats. Florence was friendly too, but she's the one that had all the Hollywood connections. all of the people who were in the arts, the writers, the painters. And so they created a true cafe society in their hotels that really hadn't existed as yet. So it was all innovative, it was all new, and her charm, she was very, very charming when she was young. Her charm spoke volumes to everybody. And without putting too fine a point on it, just about every man who met her wanted to sleep with her.
And most of them did, right?
I lost count.
They were not I was trying to think, how many could there be?
I lost count.
Okay.
Maurice Chevalier, on and off over the years.
Charlie Chaplin.
Charlie Chaplin was Frank's friend as well. And his career was beginning to falter in the early 30s because he didn't believe in talkies. So when he came to the south of France at Florence's invitation, and also his brother Stanley lived in Nice, they cooked up a lot of different things together, and Frank ended up getting Charlie into Mussolini for tea. I believe that was a movie, and all sorts of other people, very high up in Italian filmmaking, German filmmaking, this is before the war, and of course in French filmmaking. And he began an affair with Florence at this time.
She was a different type woman for him because he usually liked very young girls.
I know. I mean, this was amazing. But if you think about it, he asked Florence to come to Hollywood. She would star in his next picture. Frank said, you know the rules. If you're my wife, you cannot perform. So in a way, all of the activities that she did with the hotels was her way of performing, that was off the stage, as it were. Because Frank knew the way that men looked at women who were performing at that time.
Yeah.
So he didn't want people looking at his wife that way.
Now, the two of them they were friends with Scott and Zelda for a while, right?
A short while. At that point, what's interesting is Scribner's had asked Scott to rewrite The Great Gatsby, because his West Egg and East Egg didn't seem to gel very much. So he went off with Zelda to the Riviera with the Murphys. And it was at that time that he was meeting all of these very wealthy people and understood in quite a different way how to make Gatsby come alive. And amongst them were Frank and Florence. But Florence took a particular shine to Zelda, because I think the two women felt that they were in their husband's shadows. And she felt that Zelda was great fun and she was wonderful. The only problem is they were both always drinking. And when Scott decided that he was going to kidnap the orchestra in the middle of a number, which he did, Florence was basically ordered,
They had to cut them loose.
we have to cut them loose, absolutely.
The Great Depression didn't seem to affect Florence and Frank very much because he sold his stock off before the crash.
I know.
But then World War II came. France is divided into occupied and free zone, and Florence chose to throw in her lot with the occupied zone. She was a flat-out collaborator with the Nazis.
Yes, and that wasn't known until my book. Up until my book was written, all the other books that were written about the French occupation and Florence as part of that state that she had a collaborationist salon, which is true, but also it was a way for the resistors, of which there were quite a few in her salon as well, were able to talk to the Nazis direct, including the head of censorship for the Nazis, and lots of other people who were in very important positions. So in a way, it became a place where people could speak in the old tradition of the salons going back to the 18th century. They could speak to one another without fear of being overheard. So in many ways, I don't mind the salon that much, particularly because in many cases, especially for the French people, it was their only good meal in a week.
Yeah. Well, the French were suffering terrible deprivation.
Terrible.
And Florence, who had a longtime Nazi lover, probably several.
Her favorite was Ludwig Vogel.
Right. Who was able to, keep her in the lap of luxury. She also purchased a lot of the art that had been stolen from the Jews who were transported or murdered.
Mm-hmm. That's how I came across her.
Oh, really?
Yes, because in my previous book,
Okay.
Hitler's Art Thief,
Yeah.
I'm looking through the original files of the auction houses, and I keep seeing Florence Gould bought this, Hildebrand Gerlach, who I was writing about, bought that, and then frequently they were bidding against each other, and so it was quite a thing, and that's why I decided to look her up some more.
She was also involved in a scheme to move just millions of francs of Nazi money, ill-gotten gains. I mean, probably a lot of acquired by what they did to the Jews, out of the country, so that if the Germans happened to lose the war, they would still have the money. Mm-hmm. It was, I don't know if it was money laundering or what you would call it.
It was money laundering.
Okay.
In today's terms, it was money laundering, it was high treason, it was all sorts of things.
Okay. So she was involved in this huge scheme. Mm-hmm. But she maintained, as you said, maintained her salon all through the occupation.
Yes.
After the war, when so many women were being, French women were being marched with their hair shorn and naked through the streets for having been collaborators, mm-hmm. Florence managed to avoid this. How did she manage to avoid this?
Well, Florence managed to avoid it in several different ways. The first thing she did is she hid out with her lover Vogel at one of her medical charities in Paris for 2 weeks, hoping that the dust would settle. In some ways, she was right, because at that particular time, de Gaulle was trying to make it illegal for anybody to go after women who had been guilty of horizontal collaboration. That's what it was called. And but it was still a very, very tight spot. And after those 2 weeks, Florence, for some reason, and I may have found out last night by accident exactly what happened, convinced Vogel that he had to give himself up to the Allies, which he did. And once that happened, Florence went as quickly as she could, so we're now talking September 1944, down to the south of France. When she gets down there, she discovers that Frank had been taken care of by another resistor, that her plot to try and save him from the Germans and all of that was just a sham. He didn't need her help. He didn't need her help. But she also discovered that he had paid $400,000 to the woman who had helped him. So Florence was livid, and she made Frank stop the check. There's a whole other story there.
Wow. But she survived.
Yes.
She says she survived the occupation. She survived after the occupation. Mm-hmm. Vogel became a U.S. citizen.
Much to J. Edgar Hoover's dismay, yes.
And she was never punished, much to Hoover's dismay.
Yes.
And she became a well-known philanthropist.
Yes.
An officer of the Legion of Honor, admitted to the Academy of Beaux-Arts. You call her a dangerous woman, obviously.
Yes.
Why was she a dangerous woman?
Well, if you think what she did to her first husband, who was never the same afterwards, that made her dangerous. She was dangerous to cross. By the 1950s, she wanted to control a lot of the writers who she had befriended during the war, and they would get drunken telephone calls late at night. She would do things that were extremely hurtful to their careers, and it made things quite difficult for people who were powerless. Florence's power resided in her beauty and in her money. And as her beauty faded, her money was the thing that she brought to the fore a lot more and used against some of the people that she had previously helped, but then helped other people.
Okay. Very interesting. And I'm sure she's going to be, to other readers like me, she's going to be fascinating to learn about, even though I didn't like her very much.
Well, I have to admit, I didn't like her very much either. There came a week when I was deep in the Nazi things, and I kept saying, why didn't Hoover win? Why didn't Hoover win? Mm-hmm. And I put forward a few theories why he didn't win, but it was literally slamming down the computer and going, I don't want to be writing this anymore. And I started to research my next book.
Yeah.
And I
Had to
decided
take a little break, and then went back to it. Well, thank you for going back to it.
Thank you.
We're out of time. I want to thank author Susan Ronald for joining me today. Her book, A Dangerous Woman, American Beauty, Noted Philanthropist, Nazi Collaborator, The Life of Florence Gould, is available online and in stores now. For One to One, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.